Okay, let's get started. Am I clear enough? My voice? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you for letting me know. Hello everyone. Good morning, Indonesia, and good afternoon, Australia. The Honorable the Attaché for Education and Cultural Affairs, Indonesian Embassy in Canberra, Bapak Muhammad Imron Hanafi, the Honorable Speaker, Mr. Reiner Horiz, and all participants, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our session today, and nice to meet you all here in our very first collaborative talk show with CHIPS, or the Center for Indonesian Policy Studies. Thank you so much for attending once again. As you know, our topic for today's meeting will be about Career Talks 2021, Becoming a Public Policy Researcher. I believe that all of you here maybe are willing to be a public policy researcher as well, because you are joining our event today. I think for me personally, becoming a researcher is very interesting and challenging as well, because by being a researcher, we can discover the truth, we can build knowledge, as well as give impacts to our community as well as wider communities as well. Now, before we talk about becoming a public policy researcher more detail, let me introduce myself first a bit. My name is Nisrina Iqbal. You can call me Nisrina. I am second semester student at Monash University, Australia, majoring in Master of ESOL. And now it is an honor for me to be the moderator for this interesting event. Now, everyone, because I have introduced myself to you all, can you please introduce yourself as well, one by one, in the chat column, so that we can know you more. You can write down your name and your institution maybe, or your affiliation, and maybe your research interest as well. Yeah, you can start writing down that first so that we can see who are you and what is your research interest in the chat column. Yeah, let's wait a bit because it takes a bit much time to do that. I'm so curious, who are you and what is your research interest? If it is mine, my research interest will be TESOL, just as my major, you know. Okay, this is Evi from UGM. UGM is Universitas Gadjah Mada. It is a university in Indonesia. It is a prestigious university. Oh, there is Radikal Yuda from ANU, Australian National University. Okay, there are a lot of people here from various countries. Okay, yeah, you can keep introducing yourself. Yeah. Okay. Wow, there are a lot of people here. Okay, everyone, I think I cannot read one by one of your introduction, so I do hope. Yes? Okay. Okay, yeah, because I cannot read one by one of your introduction. I do hope that you can enjoy this meeting, and please ensure that you mute yourself while the speakers are speaking later. But feel free to always open your camera because it is nice to see your faces until the end of the session. You can also unmute yourself when the speaker are speaking later. When the speakers want you to do so later, so that our meeting will run well until the end of the session. Yeah. After this, there will be two opening speeches. The first one will be from PPI Australia, and the second opening speech will be from the Attaché for Education and Cultural Affairs, Indonesian Embassy in Canberra. Okay. Then, after the opening speeches, we will have our main speaker, Mr. Reiner Horiz, and have a talk show about becoming a public policy researcher, especially in CHIPS. During the talk show later, you can write down your questions on the chat column. However, once the talk show is done later, there will be an interactive session, and I, as the moderator, will choose some of the participants whose questions have not been discussed yet in the chat column, discussion in the talk show, so that you as the participants can directly ask your questions to Reiner orally, like that. And to begin with, I would like to invite Mas David Silalahi, a representative from PPI Australia, the head of Interagency and Advocacy Department, to give an opening speech to formally open our event today. David Silalahi, time is yours.
Thank you, Mbak Nisrina. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semua. Sorry, Mr. Reiner, I will deliver my brief report in bahasa. Selamat pagi, selamat siang, salam 24 jam untuk semua peserta yang ada di berbagai belahan dunia, ada di Indonesia, ada di Australia, saya lihat ada di Amerika juga, dan ada di Malaysia. Salam sehat untuk kita semua. Izinkan kami, saya David Silalahi, mewakili Perhimpunan Pelajar Indonesia di Australia, juga mewakili panitia kegiatan ini, Karir Talk 2021, menyampaikan laporan singkat sebagai pengantar kegiatan kita hari ini. Sedikit tentang PPI Australia, kami terbentuk sejak 1981, jadi sudah mau 40 tahun. Ya. Nah, PPI Australia sendiri terdiri dari 8 cabang dan 33 PPI ranting di tingkat universitas. Nah, berdasarkan data dari KBRI, rata-rata visa pelajar Indonesia di Australia itu kira-kira 4.000 sampai 5.000 per Australia. Ada 20 ribuan pelajar Indonesia yang menempuh studi. Jadi ini tentunya sangat menarik gitu ya. Bisa saja satu atau dua atau banyak dari antara mereka ini bisa akan menjadi public policy researcher ke depannya gitu. Nah, kemudian latar belakang kegiatan acara ini sebetulnya ada tawaran dari Center of Indonesia Policy Study CIPS untuk kolaborasi. Jadi aman di Australia gitu ya, pelajar Indonesia, Indonesian student. Jadi kita menangkap baik, ayo kita buatkan acaranya, nanti kita undang semua teman-teman, juga pelajar-pelajar Indonesia di Indonesia ataupun di negara lain yang tertarik gitu ya. Bagaimana sih public policy researcher yang akan kita ulas di acara ini. Nah, kegiatan ini sendiri berupa suatu bentuk ini ya, advokasi. Mahasiswa alumni, ada mahasiswa yang mungkin tertarik ingin magang, nanti bisa ditanyakan di sini. Atau mungkin sudah menjadi alumni, lalu ingin menjadi policy researcher. Nah, tentunya ini menjadi kesempatan yang sangat baik untuk kita berdiskusi. Nah, kegiatan ini tentu menyasar secara spesifik. Jadi mungkin hanya teman-teman yang dengan latar belakang public policy atau public administration gitu ya, yang akan tertarik di acara ini. 27 pendaftar per jam per siang ini ya. Jadi saya lihat ada dari Indonesia, Australia, ada dari USA, tadi ada dari Malaysia juga. Dan dominan latar belakangnya memang public policy. Jadi sangat pas nih acaranya. Jadi saya melihat jumlah peserta kita ini kira-kira separuh dari yang daftar. Nah, kemungkinan ini ada teman-teman yang tadinya ingin sekali hadir, tapi mungkin ada halangan, sehingga tidak bisa hadir, tidak perlu khawatir. Kenapa? Karena acara ini kita rekam dan akan tersedia di channel YouTube PPIA. Jadi nanti setelah meskipun acara ini sudah selesai, lalu teman-teman yang nggak bisa hadir, tetap bisa mengakses ke YouTube PPIA sehingga tetap mendapatkan informasi yang sangat baik di acara ini. Nah, pesan saya, kalau teman-teman mungkin setelah hadir di acara ini, kemudian merasa acara ini sangat baik informasinya, lalu ada teman-teman yang belum bisa hadir, belum mendapatkan info, nggak ada salahnya dibagikan juga, sehingga mereka mendapatkan informasi yang sama. Nah, kami dari panitia secara khusus mengucapkan terima kasih kepada Bapak Imran Hanafi, atas pendidikan dan kebudayaan dari KBRI di Canberra, yang nanti akan memberikan sambutan, opinion remarks di acara kita ini. Kami juga berterima kasih pada Pak Mr. Reiner Horiz, Executive Director CIPS, yang sudah berkenan meluangkan waktu untuk berbagi dengan kami para mahasiswa. We thank you, Mr. Reiner. Tidak lupa kami mengucapkan terima kasih juga kepada Mata Garuda LPDP dan juga Perhimpunan Pelajar Indonesia Victoria yang sudah berkenan menjadi media partner di acara ini. Nah, supaya tidak berpanjang-panjang, saya menutup saja laporan singkat ini. Akhir kata saya mengucapkan selamat kepada para peserta dan para narasumber. Kita saling berbagi di diskusi hari ini. Semoga banyak manfaat yang didapat dari terselenggaranya kegiatan ini. Mungkin demikian dari kami, PPI Australia. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Saya kembalikan kepada moderator Mbak Nisrina.
Okay, thank you so much, Mas David, for an amazing opening speech. Okay, now let's move on. I would like to invite the Attaché for Education and Cultural Affairs, Indonesian Embassy in Canberra, Australia, Bapak Muhammad Imron Hanafi, to deliver an opening speech as well. For Bapak Muhammad Imron Hanafi, for pleasing times are yours.
Terima kasih moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dan selamat siang, salam sejahtera buat kita. Pertama-tama, marilah kita mengucapkan syukur kita kepada Yang Maha Kuasa, karena di tengah era pandemi ini kita dapat beraktivitas dengan baik, yang tentunya ketika kesyukuran kita ini kita lantunkan ke Yang Maha Kuasa, ini memiliki makna yang sangat berarti buat kita semua di tengah situasi sulit yang kita hadapi pada era pandemi ini. Yang kedua, saya ingin mengapresiasi teman-teman PPI Australia dengan dukungan dari PPI Victoria yang sudah menginisiasi dan menyelenggarakan Career Talks 2021 dengan tajuk Becoming a Public Policy Researcher. Mr. Reiner yang saya hormati, Ketua PPI Australia atau yang mewakili teman-teman PPI Victoria, Mata Garuda, LPDP, dan kawan-kawan sekalian. Tajuk mengenai Career Talks yang diajukan pada saat ini, yang sebentar lagi akan disampaikan oleh Bapak Reiner Horiz, ini merupakan tajuk yang sangat baik dan bermanfaat. Saya nggak tahu PPIA khususnya mungkin Mas David ini mengambil topik ini inspirasi oleh hal apa gitu. Walaupun di dalam notes yang saya terima itu dikemukakan bahwa think tank atau policy researcher saat ini itu merupakan satu career yang sangat bagus, ya, sangat bagus dan termasuk ke depan. Apalagi di Australia ini mostly ya teman-teman mahasiswa yang pernah belajar di sini, mereka itu terbiasa dengan kegiatan-kegiatan research. Saya perlu sampaikan bahwa menjadi researcher atau menjadi bagian daripada think tank institute atau think tank organization ini merupakan satu sebenarnya pekerjaan yang sangat baik di dalam rangka menghasilkan public policy yang baik. Jadi kalau kita ingin membagi bagaimana proses ketika kemudian satu kebijakan ingin dibuat. Nah, tentunya itu berasal dari awal pikiran-pikiran yang bagus yang kemudian dituangkan dalam suatu hasil penelitian dan kemudian lalu dibuatkan policy paper ya yang dibuat oleh researcher tadi, yang nantinya policy paper ini itu akan diimplementasi oleh pihak pelaksana, eksekutor. Nah, kalau kita mengacu pada banyak negara-negara yang sudah maju, yang namanya research itu merupakan satu keniscayaan ketika ingin mengambil atau ingin membuat satu policy. Let's say, nah ketika misalnya dari segi pendidikan ya, ketika misalnya satu mata pelajaran ingin diterapkan di satu sekolah atau misalnya di satu negara. Nah, penerapan satu mata pelajaran itu tidak ujug-ujug. Itu begitu saja ketika orang berpikir, mata pelajaran ini bagus, dia harus dipelajari oleh banyak siswa. Nah, tetapi di negara yang maju, dan ini saya berharap bahwa ini menjadi kebiasaan kita, itu didasarkan pada satu penelitian bahwa sejauh mana mata pelajaran itu memang akan bermanfaat bagi pelajar-pelajar yang akan mengambil mata pelajaran itu. Nah, dan berdasarkan hasil penelitian itulah, maka kemudian diputuskan apakah mata pelajaran itu akan diambil atau tidak, akan ditawarkan atau tidak. Nah, dalam hal ini bahwa policy yang akan execute di masyarakat mestinya itu based on penelitian. Jadi policy-policy itu, kebijakan-kebijakan itu berbasis pada riset yang sudah dilakukan. Nah, sehingga eksekusi daripada policy itu nantinya tidak miss. Nah, dalam kaitan dengan inilah apa yang dilakukan oleh PPA saat ini dengan mengajak teman-teman mahasiswa atau mungkin juga ada alumni di sini untuk berbicara bagaimana pentingnya ya tentang riset itu. Dan tentu ini I appreciate to Mr. Reiner that would be as a speaker in this morning in order to encourage our Indonesian fellow here in Australia, and also as Bang David said that some of them in Indonesia and others in United States and other countries, because this topic is very important to encourage our fellow how to be falling in love to research, not just doing something by sudden thinking, something like that. But we need that our new generation in Indonesia executing the policy based on policy research. Nah, makanya dalam kaitan dengan ini, saya kira apa yang teman-teman sudah lakukan ya PPIA dengan mengundang Mr. Reiner untuk berbicara dalam hal ini ya dengan topik ini merupakan suatu yang bagus. Dan kalau menurut saya, Bang David dan juga teman-teman PPIA yang lain, saya kira topik-topik seperti ini, atau mungkin ada topik lain ya, ada topik lain yang memang juga bisa bermanfaat ya, bisa bermanfaat bagi teman-teman di tanah air khususnya, untuk dibuat secara reguler. Apalagi kita sekarang ini kan lagi di era pandemi COVID, so pertemuan kita mostly ya, dan ini akan lebih efektif dengan virtual. Yang menurut saya ini relatively itu lebih mudah. Nah, sehingga dalam hal inilah kegiatan-kegiatan ini mungkin teman-teman PPI itu akan bagus kalau ya entah itu sekali sebulan atau sekali dalam 2 bulan untuk mengangkat topik-topik ini. Karena hanya dengan meraise pembicaraan-pembicaraan seperti ini yang ya tentu kita setuju semua bahwa ini adalah konstruktif topik buat kita semua di tengah kita di tengah-tengah era di mana kita dijejali oleh banyak wacana atau banyak diskursus yang justru membuat kita ruwet gitu ya. Tetapi pembicaraan seperti ini malah kita keluar dari keruwetan itu dan kemudian kita mengajak teman-teman kita untuk membangun konstruktif thinking untuk kemudian nantinya bisa menjadi bagian dari generasi baru yang mengambil bagian dari proses untuk menjadi Indonesia yang lebih baik. Nah, dalam kesempatan inilah I would like to again appreciate to Mr. Reiner that would be as a speaker, dan juga apresiasi saya kepada PPI dan juga teman-teman lainnya seperti Mata Garuda dan juga PPI Victoria yang dengan mereka ini ya, dengan kegigihan mereka, dengan upaya mereka, kegiatan ini dapat berlangsung. Saya ucapkan selamat, semoga kegiatan ini sukses. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh dan selamat siang.
Okay, thank you so much for the opening speech, Bapak Muhammad Imron Hanafi. Now, everyone, can you please open your cameras first because we are going to take a photo together for the documentation with Bapak Muhammad Imron Hanafi. Wait, Mas David or Yudi? Yeah, can you please becoming like the host and say, instruct us to say 1, 2, 3, and then take a photo of us?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Here. I'll help you out. Cool. So, is everyone ready? Semuanya udah siap? Oke. Saya ambil halaman pertama dulu ya. 1, 2, 3. Senyum. Oke, halaman kedua. 1, 2. Oke, all good. Mantap fotonya.
Okay. Thank you so much, Yudi, for instructing us. Okay. Now, before we start our main discussion in this event, let me explain first who our speaker is today. So our speaker today is Reiner Horiz. I'm sorry if I mispronounced that because it is so difficult for me. Honestly, he got his master's degree in Reiner University Berlin, Germany in 1994. He has been becoming an executive director of Center for Indonesian Policy Studies or CIPS for around 6 years, starting from 2015 until now. And he also had so many work experiences in various countries, include Indonesia, Singapore, Thailand, Germany, China, and Malaysia. Wow, that's very amazing. Okay, everyone. So without further ado, let's greet our speaker today. Hello, Reiner. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. Thank you very much for the kind introduction.
Yes, great. Now, before we start to our talk show, can you please give us like some words around 5 minutes before we start our conversation specifically about chips? Maybe you can share to us like how it is like to be a public policy researcher based on your own experience and why you want to be a public policy researcher like now. Thank you.
I'm very happy to do that. Thank you. First of all, I would like to say thank you to both to Mas David and also to Pak Imran. Very good introductory words, very kind of you. And also I fully agree with everything that has been said, because I fully agree that you have to be in it with your heart. If you want to change things for the better, then you become a public policy researcher, because you train, you learn in a university, you want to really develop your skills, you want to develop your research, but also your communications. In order to make things better in your country, then the best way to do that, or one of the best ways to do that, is to be a public policy researcher. If I may say something about CHIPS, you're right, it was formally founded in 2015. So it's about almost 6 years old by now. Why was it created? And maybe that sheds a little bit of light on what we are trying to do. At that time, I was talking to my Indonesian friends, because CHIPS is an Indonesian organization. I'm the only foreigner working in the organization. So it's an Indonesian organization. So I spoke to my Indonesian friends who are the co-founders. And you may know Pak Arianto Patunru, who is a lecturer in ANU in Canberra. He is one of our board members and co-founders, and also Ibu Saida Sagwan, who is our chairwoman, who used to be for PKB in Parliament, and then was a commissioner in KPPU, and now she's in Basnas, a commissioner in Basnas. So I spoke to them, and we decided, all of us had some experience in policy advice in one way or another. Ibu Ida had even been in Parliament. And we agreed that there are a lot of very open-minded, first of all, there are a lot of policy issues that need to be addressed. And secondly, there are a lot of open-minded, interested policy makers who would like to make positive change for the country. And what we felt was not quite there was a think tank that would provide policy analysis for policymakers, in the sense that it is really very specific. So we're talking about very specific policies. Let's say a regulation number 8, 2020 that addresses this and has clause 15, and clause 15 says that, and that clause in that regulation has some effects that we believe are not ideal. So we're very specific, talking about regulations that we feel need to be adjusted, maybe the laws that need to be adjusted. Sometimes it's just a circular letter coming from a ministry. So to understand the toolbox and to address that toolbox when working with the policymakers. I think, but Nisrina, you are frozen, but I hope everyone can still hear me.
Oh my God, sorry.
Oh, okay. Oh no.
Maybe I need to buy you one after this.
Okay, I can see you again.
Okay, so thank you so much for the opening. What is that? Explanation about chips. And talking about tips, can you please share to us what its visions and missions are? Yeah, because I know it is a non-profit organization, and what are its visions and missions?
Yeah, happy to do that. I mean, yes, we are a Yayasan Cipta Sentosa. That's actually our Indonesian name under which we are registered. And so what are vision and mission? Let me explain it that way. Indonesia is going through multiple transition processes at the same time. There is the whole development issue, obviously, which means a modernization. There's also an integration process into the world economy, etc. So there are many, many processes happening at the same time. And the Indonesian government is trying to come up with the policies that somehow manage it in the best way so that it works for the Indonesian people. Which is not easy. There's lots of contradictions always. This is not just in Indonesia, the whole world is struggling with this. So there are a lot of challenges. Now, our vision and mission is probably to say in more abstract terms that the government cannot be left alone in this. It's actually impossible for just a few people in ministries and maybe parliament to actually adjust to this new situation. So it has to be effort by the entire society. It has to be the policymakers obviously setting the main rules and the main direction, but it requires the civil society, it requires the businesses, it requires everyone to actually come in and contribute. And what CHIP's trying to do is to make that as easy as possible and allows for constructive feedback to the policymakers. So for example, what we believe is Indonesia needs an environment where the lower income groups in society have the chance to actually enter businesses, start little businesses, grow them, have the information they need, have the internet to do this, etc. So while the government would be concerned with the abuse of the internet and the situation of people in business, in general, we are trying to convince the government, for example, it's just an example, how to allow micro entrepreneurs to really flourish and what is necessary for that. So our vision is for Indonesia to be free to prosper. So we believe that requires a level of freedom for everyone to be prosperous, and that's what we're doing.
Wow, thank you. It is so interesting that CHIPS has, it's incredible visions and missions for Indonesia, prosperity. Okay, now the next question is, how does a think tank like CHIPS actually work? Because, like it is a non-profit organization. I really want to know how can CHIPS work until today? Where can it get benefit as well? Like, for instance, like money from conducting research. That's the question.
Sure. I try to be brief because I can talk for hours about that. That's basically, obviously, my daily business to make sure that CHIPS works. I would say, most importantly, we are having our own objectives. So we have certain things that we address. We are very focused. We're working on 3 main areas. One is food security and agriculture. That's for Indonesia is a very important topic. We are concerned that while the poverty rate has fortunately been brought down successfly down to below 10%, the malnutrition among 5-year-old children is still at more than 30%. So there's a food insecurity. There's what experts would call a chronic food insecurity in Indonesia, which needs to be addressed. So we're trying to find the reasons. We look for agriculture, but we also look at the food trade. So we have our own objectives. The second one that we're looking into is education, where we understand there are a lot of technical issues with teacher training, certification, etc., and you name it. But we're also looking at the regulatory side. So what does it take to actually make the education sector flourish so that there are new initiatives and that maybe EdTech nowadays can support distance learning and what stands in the way, what regulations are not helping. So we're trying to look at the education sector as a second area. And the third area is what we call community livelihood. So anything that allows the community to, as I said, micro enterprises, for example, to take care of themselves, to actually grow their own skills and their own prosperity. So that would include the digital economy. We work a lot on inclusive internet. We work a lot on, we have worked on migrant workers that TKI that go abroad. We have worked on community forestry, where people need the management right to actually manage their own resources, forestry resources in the villages. So this is on the community livelihood. So first of all, how does CHIPS work? We have our own objectives. And the hard part then is you need to find money for us to be able to pay the researchers to actually do the work in this area. That is supported by a lot of individuals. So we really ask for individual donations, and it's wonderful to see how many people are willing to chip in a little bit of money to allow us to work in these areas. Sometimes there may be private foundations, sometimes there are government-funded agencies, sometimes there are corporations. So it's a mix, and the bigger the mix, the better. So because the bigger the mix, the more independent we are. the worst case scenario is you only have one. That's the worst case scenario. One gives you money, and then you're totally dependent. We are not. We're having, I don't know, I think we have about 80 donors, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a large group of individuals and organizations.
Okay, wow. Thank you. So now I'm going to ask, like, what are CHIP's research areas actually? Does it conduct research for all majors or research areas in this world, or just certain specific areas?
Yeah, so we are focusing on these. So food security and agriculture is one, where we work very much with the Ministry of Trade, Ministry of Agriculture, other agencies to see where Indonesia can actually improve on food security issues. We are looking at food trade when we look at import regime and how does it work in Indonesia, how can we make that more efficient. We work on agriculture, how to increase agricultural productivity. When you look at agriculture at the moment, Indonesia is quite behind in terms of productivity when it comes to the main food commodities. Indonesia produces the rice, for example, at higher costs than the other Southeast Asian countries. So how is it possible to actually make sure that Indonesian agriculture modernizes without obviously harming the farmers unduly? Any transition process there's always a harmful side to it, but we need to see how can we move forward in the best and optimal way. Then education, as I said, we have looked very much at community schools. So education policy, how it's interesting to see when we say public school and private school, we think of public school as in normal school and private school as in rich people. But then when you look at the reality in Indonesia, then you find in the bigger cities, most of the very poor send their children to private schools and not to public schools. That is in the poorest areas of Jakarta, or we did the same in Pekanbaru, for example. So once you're getting into the city centers where you have the poorest, in the city areas where you have the poorest people, they send their children not to government schools. That has to do with the distance. They're not always in the streets where poor people live. They are sometimes charging for certain things, maybe not tuition fees, but they charge for other things. And they have very complicated enrollment procedures. So community schools, pesantren, madrasah, but also other community schools, make it sometimes easier. And so we're looking into the condition of those schools, those community schools, organized by the community itself. And now increasingly, we're looking at distance learning. The third area, as I said, community livelihood. I think I explained that already.
Okay, so there are three research areas mostly that CHIPS conducted. The first one is that the agriculture. Yeah. The second one is the education, and then the third one is the community livelihood.
That's right.
Okay, that's pretty clear. Now, what do researchers in a think tank like CHIPS actually work? I mean, can you tell us the rules and also the job descriptions of researchers in CHIPS especially?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it's a little different, I would say, not totally different, but a little different from an academic researcher. Because I would say as a public policy researcher in a think tank, you need all the skills that an academic researcher has, plus some more. So you need to have proper academic research skills. So you need to know how to analyze, you need to know where you get your data, you need to know what is good data and what is questionable data. All of these academic skills you need to have. With that, as a researcher in CHIPS, you would do your policy analysis, which means you need to have this maybe additional skill of understanding regulations. So what does that mean? There is a presidential regulation, or there is a ministerial regulation, or there is a guideline, or there is a framework, or there is a circular letter. What is the hierarchy between these different tools, regulatory tools? How does that work? How ministries develop those regulations? What's the process like? So this is maybe an additional skill that you need to have. And then I think that's the most important part and most interesting part probably also. if you are a researcher in chips, you're also the main advocate of that policy. That means your paper would start with the idea of what you want to change. So as an academic paper, you would look at the history of the problem, and then you would say, so what has happened? And that's the current state. A policy paper is different. A policy paper, you know already what kind of regulation you feel needs to be adjusted, needs to be changed. So you start at the very beginning, you say, I believe regulation number 8, 2020 needs adjustment. That's in the executive summary. You already laid the whole thing out. And then the whole paper is just basically explaining why that is the case. So you give all the ammunition and the arguments in your paper, you come back at the end to the same conclusion. So you are opinionated much more than in an academic paper. You actually make a suggestion, a recommendation. And once you have that, after that, as a representative of CHIPS, the researcher goes to the ministries, introduces our findings, shares why we believe this is better, and discusses with the ministry or discusses with the DPR. We just also received an invitation to go to DPR and speak to the Komisi 6 on trade and investment. So we would also go and argue our policy recommendations with those policymakers.
Okay, so I can say that being a public policy researcher is more challenging than just being an academic researcher, because we have to know like the regulation in our nation like that. Okay, so should CHIPS researchers, public policy researchers, master all research methodologies? Yeah, since there are a lot of research methodologies in this world, right? And should they also have a lot of research experience before? Yeah. What research method do CHIPS mostly use until now?
These are two questions. So what do you need, and what are we using or applying? So definitely somebody who wants to join us needs to have some research experience. And this may be an advice to those of you who are still studying and maybe not yet graduating soon. If you are considering a career in public policy research, I can only strongly recommend that you already start writing beyond your assignments in university. You practice your writing skills, you practice your research skills, and you try to publish in a journal or on a website. I mean, you just try to get that out so that you put yourself under the pressure. That I think is quite crucial, because when we hire, we need to see what people have written, and if it has to be written by that particular person. If it is a university essay, we never know how many professors have already given advice and have already helped to improve this. So we're very keen to see, when people apply, we always want to see examples and written texts that people have actually prepared before. So that's super important, that you already have something that you produce. Second thing is, what do we use in terms of methodologies? I think in a public policy think tank, the first thing that you need to have is qualitative research skills. So you need to understand the policies, you need to understand the situation, you need to be able to work with the existing literature, the literature not only in Indonesia, but also in other countries, the relevant policy discussions around a certain topic. That is important. Sometimes we also need quantitative skills. Obviously, sometimes that involves statistical analysis and the use of certain statistical software. That can also be an asset. However, I would say the more important is the qualitative skill, because on the quantitative side, sometimes we work with external experts, or we also have external, let's call it external experts who we cooperate with. So if we have a strong qualitative skill in the team, maybe we'll find a quantitative co-author to help us with the quantitative analysis for a certain research.
Okay, if I'm not mistaken, you have mentioned like Chips already like talk about the findings to DPR and also like the Ministry of Indonesia. Can you please give us like some examples that chips have already done and it affects the regulation in Indonesia so far?
Yeah, we've been invited to Parliament already a couple of times. We have meetings with Minister of Agriculture, we have the minister himself, but we have many meetings throughout the year. If you want, maybe on average, we have one meeting per week with a government representative where we talk about certain policies and what needs to be addressed, etc. So we have lots of these opportunities. Sometimes we're invited to give a presentation. When COVID started, immediately the task force for disaster management asked us immediately to talk to them about food security issues. And there are so many other opportunities where the government knows us and says, we would like to know your opinion, we'd like to know your view. Does it always lead to policy changes? No, of course not. We are hopefully a source of inspiration, but we are not the policy makers. So that goes to them, and we do hope that they pick up these thoughts and implement what we suggest. But the decision lies obviously with them, especially in Parliament, because they have been elected by the Indonesian people. However, we sometimes see that what we are advocating for finds its way into the regulations, and that makes us very pleased. But we know we are not the only ones. I mean, there are also other people who are suggesting this. So, for example, when the crisis really was bad at the very beginning of COVID, we saw food prices going up a lot, and a lot of people were pushed under the poverty line because of that. So it was a dramatic development, mostly at the beginning of the COVID crisis. So let's say first half of 2020. And we have been strongly advocating to bring the food prices down by letting food into the country more easily. Food imports need to be coming in more easily. And at the time, indeed, the government relaxed import restrictions on garlic and onions and some horticultural products, which helped to bring the prices down a lot, which really reduced the burden of a lot of poor people who otherwise can't afford the food anymore. So there we see an impact. We have another long-standing issue where we try to prevent Indonesia from passing an alcohol prohibition bill, because we are concerned that if legal alcohol is banned, those who want to drink alcohol, and there's very few people in Indonesia drink alcohol, they will start turning towards illegal alcohol on a black market, and that we see as a very dangerous trend. So here, maybe with our work, and we are one of the leading advocates against an alcohol prohibition, maybe part of our success here is that it has not become a law over the years. So sometimes you also try to prevent something, not just actively create something.
Okay, Reiner, there are a lot of questions in the chat box, and I think it's our time to go to the interactive session right now because time keeps running. Okay, now can we directly move on to the Q&A session with the participants, Reiner?
Sure, of course.
Okay, now Aditya Rahmat, can you hear me? Yeah, can you please ask to Reiner your question in the chat box, because it is a very good question and I haven't discussed it yet with Reiner previously. Okay, can you please open your microphone? Wait, let me see.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. My name is Aditya Rahmat. Currently, I'm studying at Monash University, but actually, I'm a civil servant at Ministry of Finance. And my questions regarding the CHIPS work with the government. I want to ask Reiner about, based your experience, are there any challenges that CHIPS researchers could be encounter while working with the government agencies related to their independency in researching a topic that you want?
Related to the independence of our own analysis.
Yeah, maybe CHIPS has their has its goal, but the government also have their concern about
Sure.
the topic.
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, we wouldn't do the right job if all our analysis would always agree with everything that's already out there. So sometimes it's a job of an independent think tank to come up with alternatives or to say maybe there is a better solution or another solution. So, and not every government agency is willing to listen or willing to adopt that. But I mean, what we do is we always stay very diplomatic because we do not doubt anyone's intentions. We just sometimes have other suggestions. And we find many ministries are actually open to that. So they don't mind. It can, of course, if the ministry considers their way a very important one, they might sometimes react a little bit sensitive to it. But I believe as long as we are diplomatic and fact and evidence based, we can stand our ground. So that's fine, but yeah, I mean, that's the role of a public policy think tank, to sometimes say the things that maybe a ministry internally wouldn't hear. So yeah, but the independence is super important. So that relates a bit to the funding question. We are very careful when it comes to accepting a grant, let's say from an Indonesian ministry, because that's becoming very difficult then, because that will be a close cooperation and that limits our ability to freely analyze. So we don't reject it generally, but we are careful because it might lead to a conflict later. So yeah.
Thank you.
Does it answer your question, Adit?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your interesting question. And now let's move on to the second question from Dwi Sugiharti. Hello, Dwi, can you hear me? Yeah, you can unmute yourself and ask your own question from the chat box. Okay.
It seems Mbak Dwi couldn't talk at work.
Oh, yeah, maybe. So I will directly just read the question then. Okay. This is a question from Dwi. As a researcher, having research integrity is vital because it creates trust, and trust is at the heart of the research process. Researchers must be able to trust each other's work, and they must also be trusted by society, since they provide scientific expertise that may impact people's lives. From your experience, how can we maintain our integrity as a researcher?
Yeah, I love that question because integrity is just quite right. I mean, everything stands and falls with the integrity of the researcher and of the research. What we do in CHIPS is right from the beginning, we have a process where the researchers will have to, in a couple of meetings, will have to present their process, their progress, their findings. So there will always be a very creative process of questioning the way the research is being conducted. So the researcher gets a lot of feedback all the time. If others in the team disagree that this is the right way of approaching it, the researcher will hear this. So it's a tough process. It's also maybe influenced by the fact that there is a German in the organization, because I'm usually quite ruthless when it comes to criticizing things where we believe that might not be up to standard. But it's necessary, because you're quite right. At the end of the day, the research paper needs to be up to standard. People need to trust that what we're producing is of high quality and acceptable. So yeah, we need to have that. We need to make sure we are creative and constructive when we're dealing with other papers. We try to stay up to speed when it comes to international standards. So we try to enhance personal learning. So every person in CHIPS, not just the researchers, will have their personal development plans. So everybody can continue learning while on the job, maybe attend conferences, academic conferences to just understand, so what is the level of discussion like at the moment. And every researcher has to survive in that environment, not just in Indonesia, but internationally.
Okay, I hope it answers three questions because Tui is at work, so she cannot talk right now. Okay, thank you so much, Tui, for the question. Now, maybe the last question for this session from Nesita. Hello, Nesita, can you hear me?
Hi, hello.
Okay, you can ask your question directly to Reiner now.
Hello.
Hello, good morning, Reiner. I'm actually asking for the typical career path that a public policy researcher may have. Do they usually start from an intern position, or they go directly as a researcher? And how is the typical career path for that? Do they eventually get to be a manager or in the management position? And how many years do they typically for each position? From your experience in CIPS or other public policy think tanks, and also what are the typical perks, the perks of being, public policy researcher in your experience? Travels, obviously, but what are other perks that you can share to us? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Also a very good question. Travels, unfortunately, is not a perk at the moment. We would love to travel. But I understand you ask in general, not about right now. Yeah, so there are different paths. There are different paths. One would be indeed that you become an intern, get to know the organization, and we do have had interns who would then follow through. Maybe the other path, if you're coming from a rather junior position, would be that you become a trainee. So we have, besides internships, which are usually 2 months, and you just get an idea of how a think tank works, we also have trainee programs. Both internships and trainee programs are both paid. And the trainee program is 6 months, and that's far more serious. So there you really learn how to write a paper with us. So you would actually publish papers with us. You would go through extensive training programs, etc. So that's a 6-month program. After 6 months, we have a very tough screening process, and those who pass then would be offered a job as a junior researcher. So this is when you're coming from a junior position, that would be a path up into the junior researcher and later researcher position. If you have the skills already, if you have the research background and you have the skills as a researcher, you can directly apply as a researcher. Right now, we are looking for researchers. So right now, for those with a research background, you're very welcome to send us your applications because we are recruiting as we speak. So that's the direct access if you think you already have it. Once in the research position, that would go for a while, and then there would be a possibility to either become a senior researcher, would be a senior position there, or even the research director or head of research at one point. Now, you asked me how long does all of that take? It's very hard to say because it very much depends on individuals. Some people are super quick, other people are a little slower, take a little more time. In general, what I would like to say is that what I have observed in the years of my work is that the smaller the organization, the quicker the career. So if you have like a large one, and in the large one you have like 100 staff, then there's lots of competition, obviously, for the positions, and it takes a little longer to actually move up. But in CHIPS, we are currently 13 people altogether. And so we need people to take responsibility all the time. Therefore, the career path is much faster than in such a large organization. I hope that answers your question. I mean, in terms of years, it really depends. It could be you're a researcher, and for 2-3 years, you've done a great job. 2 years, 3 years, you might already become a senior researcher or research director or so. It really depends on the performance.
Yeah, thank you. That's the questions.
Okay, thank you, Nesita, for the question. Actually, Reiner, there are a lot of questions. Is that okay if we open the second interactive session? Because there are so many questions. Maybe we can take 2 of them before we give you information about the recruitment of the chips researchers. Yeah,
Okay.
is that okay? Okay. Yeah, there is a question from David. This is also a good question. All of them are good questions. Hello, David. Can you please unmute yourself and ask your questions directly?
Thank you, Nisrina. Mr. Reiner, I would like to ask about, is it possible to make a cooperation with, let's say, ministry or government? Let's say, normally we have or we propose a policy in the state budget, and then let's say for next year, we develop it this year. Sometimes we don't have time to make a study as the background of the policy. But previously we have a budget to do that, and sometimes we offer it to university, like let's say University of Indonesia or other university, to make a study for that before we take the policy. So what I want to ask is it possible if we ask you or we ask chiefs to do the study to back up our policy? So when we apply that, we are sure that we already know what the impact and what the things should be covered before we start to do the policy. Is it possible?
Yeah, thank you very, very much. A good, also, of course, a good question. The answer is yes. I think every think tank would be happy to cooperate in this. So if the government is looking out for information, then every think tank, and us included, I think we're very happy to provide our research skills and resources to actually provide the evidence. This could be either, sometimes we differentiate between a policy paper and a more like a background paper or more like a study. So this might be more like a background study.
Yeah.
Yeah, because as a policy think tank, as I said earlier, sometimes it leads to a bit of a problem when we have certain, sorry, is that an echo here? I can hear can hear myself. But for you, I hope it's clear. So sometimes it can create a problem if we have a certain policy recommendation, and then the ministry doesn't agree with our policy recommendations. So we just need to have a very clear understanding what the government is looking for. And if it's a background study on certain evidence, and I see, for example, you brought the example of the LPG containers, then we know exactly what you're looking for, and absolutely, we're very happy to provide the evidence for that.
Okay. Thank you, Reiner.
Sure.
Okay, I hope it answers your question, David. Now let's move on to the last question. It is from Surya. Hello, Surya. Can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay. Hello. Can you
Hello.
hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Reiner. And my question is, we know Indonesia is a democratic country, so many parties in the world of country, and each party has their own goal, their opinion, their own opinion. And what is the connection between parties and independent think tank? What should we do as an independent think tank researcher? We know the situation in Indonesia is, for example, a big party. They have a powerful voice in the parliament, but somehow their opinion is quite lack of scientific process. So it produce not robust policy also. So what do you think, Mr., about this situation? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, parties are so important. Political parties are so important. But they're also, of course, a dangerous territory for a think tank. So while we need to make sure that we stay independent. So we cannot work specifically with one political party. That's not possible. But on the other hand, if a political party reaches out and says, we wouldn't mind if you shared your knowledge and shared your expertise with us, we would not reject that. So any party can come to us and ask us for advice, information, or so. We would just always stay open to everyone. And if we can, we will always share this information with all the parties in Indonesia. We have absolutely no party bias. So we try to stay independent, but on the other hand, we are happy to work with them. We had examples, for example, we were invited by Nasdem to actually speak to their fraksi in DPR about certain policy issue. We also had good experiences with PKB, PDIP. So there are parties sometimes reaching out, and we're very happy to share our knowledge and expertise. Parties are in a specific situation in Indonesia. Obviously, they are not the kind of programmatic parties as one would know them in Europe or in Australia. They have their very specific conditions under which they operate. And so we respect that, and we are trying to just give them as much information as we can.
Okay, I hope it answers your question, Surya.
Thank you very much.
Okay, because the time is up, I'm so sorry. There are so many questions still. I think all of us here are interested to be part of CHIPS researchers, I guess. So, Reiner or Mbak Dahlia, maybe, can you please tell us if you are interested in joining CHIPS or taking part as a researcher in CHIPS? What steps should we do? Is there any job vacancy or internship currently? Yeah.
Okay, maybe I could answer that question. First of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Dahlia Ramya. I'm taking a role as a human resource officer in CHIPS Indonesia. So I'll share screen a bit. Wait a second. I hope it could be seen. Okay, so yeah, as Reiner has mentioned before, so currently we're opening a job vacancy as a researcher in CHIPS. So if you are interested to know more about the positions and you want to apply in our institutions, please go to this link. I will copy this link to the chat box as well later on. And the deadline is 28 February 2021. And if you want to know any other opportunities that may available in CHIPS as an internship, senior fellows, or any other opportunities, you can ask me through my emails, dahlia.ramya@chipsindonesia.org. And last but not least, don't forget to follow our social media to get the latest updates about events or opportunities in CHIPS. There is Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and also our website. So I think that's all. Thank you so much for coming. Back to you, Mbak Nisrina.
Okay, so guys, don't forget to follow all the social media of CHIPS for further information. Yeah. Okay, since the time is over already, thank you so much for the Attaché for Education and Culture Affairs, Indonesian Embassy in Canberra, Bapak Muhammad Imran Hanafi for attending, as well as from CHIPS, Mr. Reiner and Mbak Dahlia, and everyone attending this event today. Thank you so much and see you on the next event. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you
It was
so
a
much,
pleasure, and everyone stay safe.
Thank you, Mbak.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Reiner. Thank you, Mbak Dahlia.
It was a pleasure.
Thank
Miss
you.
Reina.